Well, here we are with this Teachable Spirit Radio. We just hope you're ready to listen to a little presentation I gave a couple weeks ago, but it's never going to lose its prime just because it was given a couple weeks ago. Got a little music in the background. Mark O'Connor, fantastic musician, does some bluegrass. Had the opportunity of seeing him in concert a few years ago, where he did like dueling banjos, but this was a dueling violin with a duel with a cello, and it was absolutely awesome. We learned some things that night, and I could tell you a little bit, just kind of opening remarks, that the lady that was playing the cello was a friend of ours. And she said the preparation that she had to go through in playing the cello in such a way that she was going to play with Mark O'Connor was something that was just brand new to her. But she was willing to take up the challenge. She was teachable. She had a teachable spirit. So I'd just like to share a few things with you tonight as we go through the aspects of a teachable spirit. And we're going to talk about it from the aspect of all of us are looking at the opportunity to move forward. You know, when we were children, young adults, middle-aged adults, like myself, an older adult, there's things that we needed to learn, there's things that we had to learn, and all of them required us to have a teachable spirit. Because let's put it this way. If you look around for those times when you were in school, we all had our favorite subjects. That's true. And we all did well in those subjects, I believe, for one reason. We liked them, and that increased our teachability. In other words, our spirit was much more willing to accept something that we liked than something we didn't like. And I know there were subjects that each one of us, we had favorites. And some we were really good at, but some it took a lot of effort to get through. And you know, that's the same way in dealing with people. We find that there's a lot of people, we have no problem getting along with them. Others, it's a real challenge. So we have to be willing to be both teachable in learning how to deal with people, and we also have to learn some things as far as how that we can apply what we've learned to those situations. In the book by Stephen Covey called Principle-Centered Leadership, he talks about teachableness. And he's coming from the standpoint of talking to leaders of how they need to be teachable, which means being able to operate with the assumption that you as the leader don't have all the answers. You don't have all the insights, and you must be willing to value different viewpoints, judgment, and experiences that the people that you're leading may have. In other words, basically I would say you've got to have a teachable spirit if you're going to be a good leader. And when we come from this perspective, we add value and we increase both honor and power, which has been given to us if we're a leader by those that we lead. But at the same time, I would say we also add value. We increase both honor and power to those that we're leading. So it's like a double-edged sword. or I would call often a double blessing. So teachability, I believe, is a spiritual condition. And do you possess a teachable spirit? Some people do, and they'll exercise it, and they'll make that spirit stronger within them. Some people refuse to be teachable. In other words, I've had an experience in my lifetime in athletics, in the military, and in business, where I dealt with people that were often extremely gifted in their talents and abilities that I believe were given to them by God. But when it came to being teachable, of being able to increase what they'd already had, often they didn't want to, or they would just shut down. In other words, you would start speaking to them, sharing with them, and they would shut it off. And you know what happened? Usually, they were limited in the performance. They were limited in how they could perform. They were also limited in when it came to teamwork, because they wanted to be sometimes known as the prima donna. You know, they got all the accolades, where those that were willing to be teachable, learning, and working a lot harder sometimes got nothing but just the work. But I remember a friend of mine who's a very well-respected financial planner. He was given a presentation to a large group of business people, and he was talking about education. And he said, you know, a lot of people think that going to a very prestigious university is worth all the money that they place into that form of education. And I don't need to name off universities, but you can think of those Ivy League schools, or schools on the West Coast, or maybe schools in your own home state that people consider this is a top-notch school. You go there, you get a degree, and you can get a great job. But my friend John said this. He said, it is good for just that first job, maybe even a second job, where the door will be open to you because you have the sheepskin from a prestigious university. But here's what happens. Once you get on the job and people find out that you're not teachable, you don't perform well, you can't relate well, and you just perhaps even have a rotten spirit, you'll be finding the door out as fast as you found the door in. So the aspect of just getting a great formal education sounds okay on the outside, but what people are looking with, are you teachable? Are you willing to learn even after having a very prestigious formal education at a high-level university? Are you willing to learn on the job, and are you willing then to perform to your teach abilities? So let's look at a couple things here that are extremely important, and I've hit upon it in kind of a lightweight area, but we're going to look at the aspect of the essence of a teachable spirit. And I look upon this as being three areas. Are you disciplined? Are you a person of character? And are you willing to listen? And so often this is the area where a lot of people come up short. They're not disciplined. They have some major character flaws, and they're not willing to listen at all. So if you're going to be a good leader that's teachable, you need to first of all look at your own personal disciplines, check and recheck your character, and if there's areas that you need to change, improve, then you need to take something by the hand and do it. You've got to be willing to make the change, looking in the mirror and say, where do I need to making changes. And above all, you need to be willing to listen. So in this kind of closing out, I look at this as far as the areas of where each one of us needs to prepare ourselves to have a teachable spirit. First one is just preparation. Are you willing to get ready to learn? John Wooden, very famous basketball coach, he always looked at his proteges, and he had some great ones at UCLA. He always looked at them. Were they prepared to come and learn what he wanted to teach them? And he had some great, just some great people to teach. But they also had great abilities, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I remember watching Kareem when he was a freshman at UCLA, and he came and played our college. And it was awesome to watch this guy. We got beat real bad. But he just went on from there. And if you've ever heard Kareem Abdul-Jabbar speak of John Wooden, you knew how much he'd learned from this man to just increase his already strong giftedness that he was given. Also, you've got to look at the area of contemplation. In other words, a willingness to learn from mistakes so you can move forward. In other words, just looking at yourself and looking at the things that need to be done. Here's a question. Who are you doing this for? In other words, who are you looking at yourself? Are you looking at yourself just for a selfish reason? Or are you looking at yourself so you can improve yourself, so you can help other people improve? You know, we all have to look at the mistakes we've made. And that's another good reason for contemplation, of being able to look at the mistakes, the errors, perhaps some bad judgment. But you know, if you keep making the same errors over and over again, that's stupidity. Or could it be ignorance? I think you're just going to have to weigh it out and say, is that I didn't learn enough, so I keep making the same mistake over again? Or you just make the same mistake over again because you're just not paying attention, you don't care, and it just happens over and over again. So you've got to be willing to engage yourself. You know, look at yourself in the mirror. Okay? Now, the third area is the application. Okay? This is really the true value of what you're learning, is being able to apply it. In other words, if I'm teaching you something, I come alongside of you. When I was in the military, we had something called on-the-job training. And I expected the person that I was training on the job to be able to perform based upon what they had already previously learned, and then what I could show them that I had learned by experience, and that they would be able to take this and improve. Okay? So when we look at that, you've got to be able to say, I believe what you're sharing. I receive what you're sharing. I'm going to even testify to others that I've learned what I needed to learn. And then you've got to be willing to share it with others. In other words, you've got to take it in and then give it out. So go back to beginning, and you'll find that there is a choice to be disciplined enough to be willing to listen and to be willing to learn from others. This is the spirit of teachability. And one last thing I would say, if you have been willing to do the steps to improve yourself so you can improve others, you see that by improving yourself, you will influence others. You will be able to add values to others. That is a teachable spirit. This is Douglas Allen Frazier with what we call Teachable Spirit Radio. I hope you'll come back and take another listen. There might be some little nuggets in here that you can gain that will just make you a better person, move you forward in the areas that you want to move forward in, and be able to just look at life and the life of others around you with a new perspective.